Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And today I'll speak as a Minister for Children and Youth Services, but also as a Minister responsible for anti-racism. Mr. Speaker, it is an honour for me to rise in the House today to formally recognize the United Nations International Decade for the People of African Descent. And before I start, I just want to thank MPP Hunter and also MPP Granville-Anderson for their work that they've done to get to this point, because it was the three of us and many members of this caucus that worked hard over the last year to get to this point today. And of course, I'd like to thank the Premier. In recognizing this decade, we're acknowledging that people of African descent represent a distinct group of people whose human rights must be promoted, and must be protected, and whose history, culture, and contributions must be respected and celebrated. I'd like to take a moment to recognize and thank our community partners that are here to join us today. The men and women that you see in the gallery and the East Members Gallery and other parts of the legislature here today are folks that have been working hard to advocate on behalf of the community and the rights of racialized people here in Ontario. And I just want to say thank you so much for being here. Without your help, we couldn't do what we're doing here today. Mr. Speaker, around the world there's around 1.3 billion people of African heritage. Outside of Africa, it's roughly 200 million people, and over 500,000 people identify as members of the African community or people of African descent here in Ontario, the province we call home. The International Decade for People of African Descent calls for the international community to join together with people of African descent to raise awareness, collect statistics, preserve historical memory, and celebrate the achievements of Black people in the spirit of recognition, justice, and development. And the objective, Mr. Speaker, of this decade, which started back in 2015 and runs until 2024, are to promote the respect, protection, fulfillment of all human rights and fundamental freedoms of people of African descent, and to recognize in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It's to promote greater knowledge of and respect for the diverse heritage, culture, and contributions of people of African descent. Also to adopt and strengthen national, regional, and international legal frameworks according to the Durban Declaration and Program of Action and the International Convention of the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination, and to ensure their full and effective implementation. Mr. Speaker, the Canadian government invited a delegation of United Nations human rights experts to assess anti-Black racism here in Canada. And during their visit last October, the group raised concerns about systemic anti-Black racism in the criminal justice system, the education system, the underemployment of Black workers, and damaging legacy of Canada's history of slave trade, racial segregation, and marginalization. And at the same time, Mr. Speaker, the UN delegation welcomed the establishment of Ontario's Anti-Racism Directorate to address this systemic racism and promote fair practices and policies. Mr. Speaker, we know that racism takes many forms. Sometimes it's subtle, sometimes overt and intentional. Systemic racism harms our entire society, but Black and African Canadians are among the most uniquely and immediately affected by it. It is true that we've come a long way, Mr. Speaker, but there's so much more that we know we can do as a society to eliminate systemic racism. Together, every single person in this province has a role to play to build a multicultural society that everyone can be proud of. And our government is committed to fighting systemic racism faced by Indigenous and racialized people, including specifically anti-Black racism impacting people of African descent. And to inform our work, as the minister responsible for this file, I traveled across the province between June and December of last year and listened to people share their stories around racism. And Mr. Speaker, I have to say, we interacted with over 4,000 people across this province, And I have to say the stories that came out were just incredible. People spoke about the fact that they landed in a new country and they couldn't find employment that was connected to their professional credentials. And we heard about people expressing the disproportional number of black families involved in the child welfare system and how their children, once going into that system, lose their identity. We listened to people talk about their educational experiences and the need for change there. There were many thousands of people that shared their stories and talked about how racism impacts their lives. And Mr. Speaker, this government, our people, and all of Ontarians are committed to working towards eliminating systemic racism and building a society characterized by racial equity. Recognizing the UN's International Decade for People of African Descent as we celebrate Black History Month this February is part of that commitment. This province first proclaimed Black History Month back in 1993, marking the 200th anniversary of a law banning the importation of slaves to here in Upper Canada, which we now refer to as Ontario. Last year, Ontario passed legislation to formally recognize February as Black History Month on an annual basis. Black History Month is an opportunity to reflect on the history that has collectively shaped us. It is important to share these challenges faced by Black Canadians and to celebrate their accomplishments and outstanding contributions to this province and to this country. Mr. Speaker, as the Minister responsible for Children and Youth and the Minister responsible for this government's Anti-Racism Directorate, I am committed to engaging with communities in every corner of this province and working with my colleagues across the aisles as we address systemic racism to create opportunities and equitable outcomes for all. Moving forward, Mr. Speaker, we will break down those barriers and will help every Ontarian, regardless of where they're from, to reach their full potential. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Further member statements?